He said 12 words in Mandarin, then 7 in Arabic, then 4 in Russian, and the entire negotiation table went silent. Not politely silent. Not the kind of silence that fills a room when someone makes a joke that doesn't land. This was the silence of people who had just realized all at once that the man standing in the corner in a gray custodial uniform had understood every single thing they'd said for the past 3 days. Nobody moved. The lead counsel for Harrington Vance Group looked at the man the way you look at something that shouldn't exist. Victor Cobb just looked back at him. 3 days earlier, nobody in that building would have remembered his name if you'd asked them. That was the thing about Victor. He had a face that people's eyes moved past without stopping, the kind of unremarkable steadiness that registers as furniture rather than person. He was 51, wide through the shoulders from years of physical work, with close-cropped silver hair, and a habit of walking slowly that some people mistook for laziness. He drove a 2009 Chevy Silverado with a cracked passenger mirror. He brought lunch in a green thermos his daughter had given him years ago, before she moved to Portland. He ate alone, usually in the east stairwell on the 14th floor, where the window faced the river. He had worked at Collard & Finch Investments for 6 years. Before that, 3 years at a shipping logistics firm. Before that, 12 years in various places that weren't on his resume. Nobody asked about the gap, nobody thought to. The Harrington Vance acquisition had been in the works for 11 months. It was the kind of deal that made managing directors stop sleeping. A cross-border merger involving subsidiaries in 4 countries, a projected valuation north of $2 billion, and a due diligence process so dense that Collard & Finch had hired 2 outside law firms just to handle the documentation. The talks had stalled twice already. Now, with both delegations in-house and 3 days on the calendar, there was genuine pressure. The kind of pressure where a wrong word in the wrong room could collapse the whole thing. The delegations were using 2 conference rooms on the 14th floor, the glass-walled one that faced the atrium for formal sessions, and the smaller internal one, the one the staff called the fishbowl, for side conversations. The fishbowl had no windows. It had a round table and 8 chairs and a phone in the middle that nobody ever used. It also had a wall that backed up to the east stairwell. Victor had known that for 6 years. He'd noticed it the same way he noticed most things. Quietly, without drama, the way you notice that a door hinge is starting to rust, or that the 3rd step on a staircase is slightly higher than the others. He noticed because it was his job to notice things about the building, and he'd stopped paying attention to it years ago because nothing interesting had ever happened in that room. Until Monday. He heard them by accident the first time. He was eating lunch on the landing, his thermos open, the river visible through the narrow window, when voices started up through the wall. 2 of them, then a 3rd. At first he thought they were speaking English. Their cadence was English, formal, the rhythm of men choosing their words. But then the frequency shifted, and he recognized the transition the way you recognize a song changing key. They had switched to German. His German was rusty. It had been years. But certain words don't fade. The ones you learn under pressure, the ones associated with stakes, and he caught enough to understand that the number being discussed was not the number on the table in the formal session. The number in the fishbowl was different, smaller, by quite a lot. He sat very still for a moment. Then he finished his lunch, packed up his thermos, and went back to work. He didn't tell anyone, not yet, because he wasn't certain, and because he was a man who had learned the cost of certainty arrived at too quickly. Tuesday was when he started paying real attention. He arranged his schedule, without making it look arranged, so that his afternoon rounds brought him to the 14th floor between 2 and 4. He cleaned the drinking fountain outside the fishbowl. He replaced the paper towels in the men's room down the hall. He worked slowly, methodically, with the unhurried competence of someone who has done the same thing so many times that his hands move without instruction. And he listened. On Tuesday, they used German again for 20 minutes, then Japanese, then briefly, a regional dialect of Cantonese that Victor recognized from a 2-year period in his life he rarely thought about anymore. The Cantonese confirmed what the German had suggested. The delegation from Harrington Vance was running a parallel set of numbers, a private accounting of what the deal was actually worth to them, stripped of the inflated valuation they were presenting in the formal sessions. They were preparing quite deliberately, to walk Collard and Finch into a contract that would cost the firm somewhere in the range of $400 million more than they should have paid. It was elegant, as frauds go. Entirely verbal. Nothing on paper, nothing that could be subpoenaed. Victor went home on Tuesday night and sat at his kitchen table for a long time. His apartment was the kind of place that told you exactly what mattered to a person if you knew how to read a room. There were no decorations except one photograph on the refrigerator held with a magnet from a hardware store, his daughter at her college graduation, squinting into the sun. There was a small shelf of books near the door, mostly worn paperbacks, the spines cracked and recracked from multiple readings. History, language, a few novels in French. A sweaty grammar book so old the cover had separated from the binding. There was no television. On the kitchen table there was a legal pad. He'd had it for years. He used it to think. He sat down and started writing, in the careful, deliberate longhand of someone who was taught that handwriting mattered, back when that was still taught. He wrote what he'd heard. He wrote the numbers. He wrote the languages, and the order in which they'd been used, and the names he'd caught, and the phrases that had repeated. He looked at it for a while. Then he wrote, at the bottom of the page, "Who do I tell?" The problem was one he'd faced before, in different forms, in different buildings. The problem was not knowing whether the person he told would be glad, or afraid, or, worst of all, already part of it. Victor had been in situations where he'd raised a concern to the wrong person. He had been in his previous life a man whose concerns carried weight. That life was gone now, for reasons that were entirely his own, and that he had never discussed with anyone at Collard and Finch. But the instinct remained, the discipline of it, the understanding that information is only useful if it reaches someone who can act on it and will. He thought about his direct supervisor, a decent enough man named Paulson, who managed the facilities staff and whose main concern in life appeared to be the scheduling software. He thought about the office manager on 14, a woman named Bev who had always been kind to him and who he suspected was smarter than her job required. He thought about the HR department, which he dismissed almost immediately. This wasn't an HR situation. What he needed was the person at the top of this building who had the most to lose. He knew her name. He'd heard it in the hallways, in the elevator, in the particular way people lowered their voices when they talked about her. Loretta Finch, 63 years old, one of the two surviving founders of Collard and Finch, and the one who had actually run it for the past decade, ever since Richard Collard had stepped back for health reasons. She was known among the maintenance staff for saying good morning in the elevator when almost no one else did. Victor had never spoken to her. He was a man who cleaned floors. She was a woman who ran a $2 billion negotiation. He wrote her name at the bottom of the legal pad, under the question. Then he went to sleep because he'd learned long ago that fatigue corrupts judgment. Wednesday morning, he came in early. He pulled his cart out of the supply room on the second floor and took it upstairs, and he worked and he thought. He was on the 12th floor when he made his decision, cleaning the glass on a row of empty offices that faced the atrium, watching the delegations arrive below. The Americans in their dark suits, the Harrington Vance team in lighter colors, everyone moving with the particular deliberateness of people conscious of being observed. He watched the woman who walked slightly ahead of the others on the Collard and Finch side. She had white hair, cut short, and she moved like someone who had decided, a long time ago, that confidence was a choice rather than a feeling. He went back downstairs and spent 20 minutes writing a note. Not an email, a note. On paper, from the legal pad, torn off carefully at the perforation. He wrote it the way he had been trained once, to write things that mattered, clearly, without decoration, with only what was necessary. He included the languages. He included the numbers as best he could reconstruct them. He included the dates and approximate times. He wrote at the bottom, "I am available to speak further. Room 147, Facilities, V. Cobb." He folded it once and wrote her name on the outside and spent the rest of the morning trying to find a way to get it to her without going through her assistant. The assistant's name was Petra, and she controlled access to Loretta Finch the way a border collie controls a flock, with calm, total, cheerful authority. Victor had observed this. He also knew that Petra left her desk for exactly 12 minutes every day at 10:45 to get coffee, and used the bathroom on the floor above, because the one nearest her office was out of order, and had been for a week because the part was back-ordered. He knew it was back-ordered because he was the one who had ordered it. At 10:46, he set the folded note on Petra's desk with a piece of tape across it and walked away. Nothing happened for 4 hours. He worked, he emptied trash cans, he wiped down the elevator buttons, which he did twice because his hands needed something to do. He went to the east stairwell at noon and ate his lunch without tasting it. The voices in the fishbowl were quiet. At 2:17, his phone buzzed. It was the extension for the 14th floor conference suite. He stared at it for a moment, then answered. "Victor Cobb," he said. There was a pause, then a voice, controlled, unhurried. A voice that had delivered bad news and good news in identical tones for so many years that the tone itself was the authority. "Mr. Cobb, could you come up, please?" It was not a question. She was standing when he came in, not seated, which he noted. The formal session had apparently broken for the afternoon. The glass conference room was empty. The chairs were pushed back unevenly. Coffee cups still on the table. Loretta Finch was in a smaller side office with 2 other people, a man with a yellow legal pad who had the look of an in-house attorney, and a woman Victor didn't recognize who was looking at him with an expression of careful neutrality. He sat down when she gestured to the chair across from her. She sat across from him and put his note on the table between them, unfolded. "I want to understand what you're telling me," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll explain it as clearly as I can." He explained it. She asked questions, precise, practical questions, the kind that come from someone who has been in high-stakes rooms long enough to know exactly which details matter. He answered them. When she asked how he was certain of the German, he told her he'd spent 2 years in Frankfurt early in his career, working in logistics. When she asked about the Cantonese, he paused, then said he'd spent some time in Guangzhou. He didn't say more than that, and she didn't ask. At some point, the attorney stopped writing and just listened. "You've been here 6 years, Loretta Finch said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "I wanted to be sure," he said, "and I needed to know who to come to." She was quiet for a moment. "And you decided it should be me. You have the most to lose," he said. "And from what I've seen, you make decisions without waiting for permission." Something shifted in her face, not quite a smile. More like the recognition of a specific kind of honesty that she didn't encounter often enough. "All right," she said. "I need to verify this before the afternoon session. I need you to tell me exactly what you heard, word for word. In the languages you heard it." He did. She listened without interrupting for 14 minutes. When he finished, she was looking at the table, and there was a quality of stillness about her that Victor recognized as the stillness of a person doing very fast, very serious calculation. Then she looked up at him. "Is there anything you want?" she said, "before I ask what comes next of you." He thought about it. "I want to know that what I'm telling you is actually going to be used." "It will be," she said. He believed her. What happened next, he wasn't in the room for. He went back downstairs and worked because that was his job, and because he had learned long ago that the best thing you can do after handing something difficult to the right person is to get out of the way and let them work. He emptied the trash on the 12th floor. He replaced a burned-out bulb in the men's room on 9. He ate the rest of his lunch at his desk in the supply room. At 4:45, the afternoon session was supposed to reconvene. At 4:47, he heard raised voices from the 14th floor, not through a wall, but clearly in the atrium, carrying down through the open space the way sound always does in tall buildings, bouncing off glass and marble and finding its way to wherever the air is still. He didn't go up. He found out the rest later, in pieces, the way you always find out the things that happen behind closed doors in an organization. Loretta Finch had spent the 2 hours between their meeting and the reconvening session on the phone with the firm's forensic accounting team and with one of the outside attorneys, the one she trusted most. She had requested very quietly a cross-referenced analysis of the numbers Victor had given her against the formal documentation. It had taken 90 minutes. The discrepancy was, as Victor had estimated, substantial. She had walked into the afternoon session and placed a single document on the table in front of the Harrington Vance lead negotiator. She had not raised her voice. She had said, "I'd like to give you an opportunity to explain this before I contact the relevant regulatory bodies." The afternoon session ended 47 minutes later. The Harrington Vance team left the building without their briefcases, which, as Victor understood it from the attorney who later explained it to him, was not a good sign for them. He was called back upstairs the next morning. Loretta Finch was at the conference table with 3 other people: the attorney with the yellow pad, the unnamed woman from the previous meeting who turned out to be outside counsel, and a man Victor had never seen before who had the quiet, well-fitted look of someone who spent his working life in rooms where large decisions were made. "Sit down, Mr. Cobb," Loretta Finch said. He sat. "I want to explain something to you," she said. "What you did yesterday prevented this firm from entering a fraudulent contract that would have cost us, conservatively, $400 million over the first 5 years. Possibly more." The Harrington Vance delegation used a deliberate strategy of language switching during private sessions to develop a parallel valuation that contradicted their formal position. "You identified that. You documented it. You brought it to the right person." He nodded once. He already knew all of this. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer honestly, not modestly." He waited. "How many languages do you actually speak?" He thought about it in the way he always did. Not counting them exactly, but feeling through them, the way you feel through a set of keys in the dark until you find the shape you're looking for. "Fluently," he said. 7. "Working proficiency in 3 more. I can get by in a few others depending on the context." The man Victor didn't know. He turned out to be the chairman of the board, a position Victor hadn't known Collard and Finch even had, leaned back in his chair very slightly and said nothing. Loretta Finch looked at Victor for a long moment. How does a man with that background end up in facilities management? It was the question he had always known would come, if he stayed anywhere long enough. He had his answer ready. Not prepared the way a liar prepares an answer, but settled the way you settle a thing inside yourself over a long period of time and then stop carrying it as weight. "I had a career," he said. "It ended, not badly, just ended. I needed to work somewhere that required me to be present in a building without being present in an organization. I needed quiet. I've had quiet, and now, apparently, I've had enough of it." Loretta Finch was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you actually want, Victor?" He thought about his daughter in Portland, about the legal pad on his kitchen table, about the east stairwell and the river visible through the narrow window. "Something to do that's worth doing," he said. "I'm not particular about the title. The firm didn't create a position for him overnight. That's not how real organizations work, and Victor had no interest in a gesture. What happened was slower and more genuine than that. He was moved first to a consulting role, no official title, an hourly arrangement that Loretta Finch described to her board as specialized risk assessment. For 3 months, he sat in on due diligence sessions when the firm was working with international counterparties. He listened. He flagged inconsistencies. He wrote careful memos in his precise handwriting, which Petra eventually persuaded him to type so they could be filed properly. The first memo caught a discrepancy in a mid-size acquisition from a Dutch firm that would have buried a 5-year liability in subsidiary language. The second identified a procedural irregularity in a bond offering that the external auditors had missed. After 6 months, the attorney with the yellow pad, whose name was Jerome and who had initially looked at Victor with the polite skepticism of a man who has seen too many unexpected things to be surprised by them anymore, stopped Victor in the hallway and said, "I want you to know that memo you wrote on the Kessler thing was cited in our client brief last week. Verbatim, with credit." Victor said thank you. "Do you know what it would have cost us if we'd missed that?" Jerome asked. "I have a rough idea," Victor said. Jerome looked at him for a moment. "Where were you before all this?" Victor smiled. A small smile, the kind that opens just enough to show that there is, in fact, something on the other side of it. "Before all this," he said, "I was somewhere else." His daughter called him on a Saturday in November, which was not unusual, but what she said was, she'd seen something, not about him. He hadn't told her about any of it, not yet. She'd seen a listing, a shared post from someone in Portland who worked in finance, reposted from a legal publication. There was a brief mention of an unnamed whistleblower at a major investment firm who had flagged a fraudulent acquisition attempt, preventing significant financial exposure. It was 3 sentences. His name wasn't in it. "Dad," she said, "did you have anything to do with this?" He was in his kitchen, at the table with his legal pad, and through the window the city was doing what cities do on November Saturdays, going on the way cities always go on, indifferent to the private significance of the conversations happening inside all their buildings. "A little," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know how it would end," he said. "I only tell people things when I know how they end." "Dad, that's such a you answer." "I know." Another pause. He could hear her in her apartment in Portland, the specific background noise of her life, a radiator, a television at low volume, a city that was different from his but doing the same thing. "Are you okay?" she said. "Better than I've been in a while," he said. "I think I found something to do again." "Good," she said, and he could hear that she meant it. Not the automatic good that people say, but the real one, the one that comes from relief. He was given a proper title eventually, Associate Director of International Risk Compliance. He kept his office small. He still took the stairs more often than the elevator. He still ate lunch at his desk sometimes, and sometimes in the 14th floor stairwell, out of habit or affection. He was no longer sure which. The east stairwell door on 14 still didn't lock properly. He'd put in the maintenance request 3 times now and been told the part was back-ordered. He had stopped following up on it, though he couldn't entirely explain why. Loretta Finch stopped by his office one afternoon, not to meet, just passing through, and paused in the doorway and looked at the space, the legal pad, the worn paperbacks he'd brought from home, the photograph of his daughter on the corner of the desk. 7 languages, she said, almost to herself. 10, depending on the day, he said. She looked at him for a moment. "I've been in this business for 35 years, she said, "and I've never had someone come to me the way you came to me." He looked up from what he was writing. "Because of where I came from, because of how certain you were," she said. "You were completely calm, you had everything documented, you knew exactly who to tell and when." She paused. People who've been through something tend to move like that, like they've already lost the thing they were afraid of losing. He thought about that. "Maybe," he said. She nodded once, the way she nodded when a conversation had reached its actual end, and walked on. He picked up his pen and went back to work. The river was gray through the window of the 14th floor stairwell, and somewhere below him, the building went on with its ordinary business, full of people who had no idea that the quiet man on the 5th floor with the cracked mirror truck and the green thermos had, in the space of 3 days, changed the course of a $2 billion negotiation, saved $400 million that belonged to people who would never know his name, and found his way back after a long and deliberate silence to a life that was again worth the noise.